All right. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 10th episode, well, 10 episodes already, of SecuriTEA and Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security. Today, I'm delighted to have Justin Collins on the show. Justin has completed a PhD from the University of California. Justin has been a security software engineer at various firms such as AT&T, Twitter, SurveyMonkey, Synopsys, and more recently, Gusto. Justin is the creator of Brakeman security scanner, which is a very popular Ruby on Rails static analysis. Welcome, Justin. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very happy to have you on. So I have obviously many questions around like static analysis and like how to use Brakeman today, because it's still an amazing like open source tool developing for a long time. Obviously, not just yourself, various contributions. But before we jump into that, I looked at your background and you completed a computer science degree. So what made you interested in security in the first place? And what was the transition from computer science into?
Yeah, it was pretty much by accident, as many security careers are, I suppose. Basically, I was doing my PhD and I needed a summer internship, and I was very into Ruby, still am, and at the time, I'd watch a lot of conference talks on YouTube, and one of the companies that would come up as a sponsor was AT&T Interactive, which was in Los Angeles, which is where I was. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll try to apply for internships at this AT&T Interactive company. So I just applied to all their internships. I think it was like 5, like all the positions that they had, right? And one of them was the security team, and that was the team that actually, gave me a call and that I went and interviewed for. And then it just kind of went from there. So yeah, there was actually no like strong interest in security until I was doing it as an intern.
Got it. That's actually really interesting because like I guess some people just kind of stumble into roles, which obviously it sounds like you did.
Yes.
So what would you say is more challenging from your perspective? Would you say like more of the computer science side or the security side? Obviously, the fact that you're working as a security engineer now, kind of maybe it's both. Like, what's kind of the crossover for you?
I mean, to me, security is, it's just another part of computer science. Um, I don't know that there's one that's more challenging than the other. I would say that security is, in some ways, um, it's a field that just keeps expanding and expanding. And I, I was actually mentioning this to someone else recently. That year that I did at Synopsys, where I was not on a security team, my stress levels went down just like dramatically. Um, and just kind of just being a software engineer for a little while, it was one nice perspective, but two, like, oh wow, like the stress that I've been under, being on a security team, wow, it's just gone. Um, was a bit of a surprise to me. Like you don't realize it when you're in it. So yeah, I would say security can be pretty stressful. So that can be challenging. I think as far as intellectually challenging or something, you can find challenges in software development and security and many other parts of you know being a computer science graduate.
Got it. Why do you feel like the stress levels just went away when you went back into like a purely like software development role? Was it because like you had predefined deadlines? Obviously, you just write the integration piece or you write a particular kind of new feature that you intended to do for that release. That's it, or what was the kind of thought process?
Yeah, well, I think I've been on security teams at a few different companies now, and there's just a responsibility that you have, right? There's always the possibility that you're gonna find out, 2 a.m. in the morning that there's been some serious security, a breach, or maybe someone released a vulnerability, or not a vulnerability, but vulnerabilities out there that you are subject to, and now you got to scramble and find out, like, are we affected? Did anyone try to exploit it against us? What can we do to prevent it? So that's like always hanging over you, I think, as a security professional. Well, I guess not. If you're a consultant, it's a little bit different.
Yeah,
But if you're on a security team trying to secure a particular company and that company's resources, then yeah, it's kind of always over you that like, hey, any day something really bad could happen, and then you're going to have to be responsible for reacting to it and dealing with it.
got it. That's definitely, I could imagine that being one of the, that's probably why everyone in security has so many gray hairs. So this is, so you work at Gusto now. Can you
Yeah.
kind of just talk around? I'm going to give you the really hard question of like, what is the life in a day, like in the life of a security engineer? And that's like an impossible thing to answer because there's so many things, right? But like, what are the
Appreciate
types of things that you're doing at Gusto, and like, what are some of the things you really enjoy, and some of the technical challenges that you currently are facing at Gusto, and like, obviously as high level as you can go, obviously not breaking any kind of NDA, etc.
Yeah. Well, so about a year ago, I moved into essentially a management position. So I empower the product security team at Gusto. And that team, we're kind of split in two ways. We have one side, which is like a security partners role, which is interfacing with the with the engineering teams, doing product reviews, just helping teams make good security decisions. And then the other side, we have quite a few software engineers building security services for Gusto. One we have a blog post about we call Happy, HAPII, which is our sensitive data storage um, that we built out to have somewhere safer where, when teams say, oh, I have this sensitive data, what do I do with it? Instead of saying, oh, encrypt it or something, we say, oh, put it in this sensitive data store. We'll do the encryption for you. We provide a specific API to access it. And then we have the advantage of, being able to do like, oh, key rotations when we want to, or, just having tight control over that data. So yeah, it's kind of split in those two different areas. And then just general sort of application security, right? Things come up and questions come up, and we try to answer them, try to keep on top of vulnerable dependencies, and all that kind of normal work, bug bounty, all of that. Yeah.
Cool.
I did want to answer another part of your question though. The parts that I enjoy. What I really like doing is when we can identify something like, for example, sensitive data. Gusto has a lot of sensitive data. Uh, we do payroll benefits, other things for small businesses. So we have access to things like people's bank accounts, um, you know, social security numbers, addresses, all that kind of information, and a little bit of healthcare information. And so, one of the first challenges when I started at Gusto was, okay, we have all this sensitive data. What do we do with it? And it was very exciting to me to be able to have a team where we can say, okay, what we're going to do about it is we're going to build a new database for us to put the sensitive data in. And we're going to build it the way we want to build it, to protect that data the way we want to protect it. And then that's there for the company to use. So addressing those kind of big problems is what I really, really enjoy about the job. And I like taking on those kinds of challenges. Now, I didn't build that database; other people on the team did, but it's exciting to be on teams that can do that kind of broad work instead of what often happens on security teams, is where you're like kind of plugging these little holes, and you kind of get overwhelmed with like, there's so many little holes that I have to plug, and I don't get to focus on big problems.
Very cool. So I have this. This is obviously maybe a more like new question. You just said you moved into like more of a management role. Uh,
Yes.
what does that like? How does that change for you? Like, do you like more of the management side, or do you miss the kind of like trying to plug some of those holes occasionally, as you were saying? Um,
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. Um, what I like about management, the main thing that I like is just being able to set direction for the team to work on things that, or to have the team work on things that I think are really important and impactful and can have, make a difference at the company. Um, But yeah, of course, like I want to jump in on the technical stuff, and a lot of times I don't really even have time to do that. But some of that's also maturation, being able to say like, actually there's a team here, and the team is capable of handling these things. I don't have to be involved in every little thing. But yeah, sometimes you miss it for sure. But there's still work that I get to do, stuff that's less critical, less time critical that I can, putter along on. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. I wasn't looking for management. It was more of the team needed it, and I have theories about how I think application security should be done, and so I wanted to basically test those theories. And if someone else had been hired as the manager, then I might not have had the freedom to implement like the things that I would like to implement or take the team in the direction that I would like to go. So that's kind of how I ended up in the position.
Okay, got it. That's really cool. Obviously, sometimes these things are just natural. Same with like falling into a security internship, into like you go into a new company, they need a bit more direction, and you can provide that and test your theories. That's very cool.
I do want to make it clear that I fought against being management for several months before I gave in.
Got it.
So
Very cool. So obviously, you talked about you were really interested in Ruby. Have you always just been programming in Ruby in the past, and that's what made you interested in Ruby? So we're gonna move more into the static analysis piece.
yeah, I've been interested in Ruby for many years. I'm trying to think, probably close to 15 years that I've been involved in Ruby, writing Ruby. Um, you know, it started off actually as part of undergrad when I was, just looking around like, okay, like, my courses were like C++ and Java and one course with Scheme. And I was like, okay, like great, I want to pick up another language and maybe something in the dynamic world. And actually, oh, I don't know if I have it handy, but I bought the Perl book, that like book that's
Yep,
like
yep.
this big. And I started like reading it, and I was like, I don't know if this is a language for me. um, and so then I was looking at Python, and I was like, okay, like I don't know, maybe. And then I looked at Ruby. Of course, it comes up kind of in the same breadth as like Perl, Python, Ruby. And when I found Ruby, I was like, oh, okay, I really like this language. And then I've just kind of stuck with it for a long time, which is maybe not good from a career development perspective. But yeah, I just really like the language. I've enjoyed the community around it. Of course, 15 years, I've seen a lot of changes in that community. Um, and then yeah, so yeah, I guess I just had an interest in it for quite a while. I like the language, I like the community. Um, and yeah, that's yeah, I just kind of stuck with it. People who know me will tell you like I don't like change. So once I kind of find something that I like, I just stick with it. I go to a restaurant, I find one dish that I like, and I just kind of stick with that dish. So same thing with programming languages.
Got it. Oh, my microphone is now going crazy now that I removed my filter. Oh no. Sorry, do this 2 seconds. Gain. Oh no. All right, I will mute myself in between communication. Okay, so while I fix it, so let's talk about what made you decide to build Brakeman in the first place. So obviously you've been interested in Ruby. This was a decision to build a Ruby on Rails, in particular scanner. What made you go down that path?
So this goes back to that same internship that we mentioned before. When I was interviewing, I remember, we were talking about, I think we were probably talking about cross-site scripting, and I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I think maybe we were talking about like how would you find cross-site scripting, something like that. And I said, well, like what if you had a tool that would just like look at your inputs and look at your outputs, and if an input got to an output without getting escaped, then you'd find cross-site scripting. And I remember the interviewers were very excited about this. If I recall it, I think it was Tim Zaw and Carl Johnson who were interviewing me, and they're like, "Oh, like, is there a tool like that for Rails that will do that?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." Like I literally was just making it up because, like I mentioned, I had no security background. I didn't know about static analysis security tools or dynamic scanning. Like I didn't know anything. I was just like, oh, what if you could connect these two things? And so I was like, I don't know. And then oh, actually, sorry, I said I don't know, but I'm sure it wouldn't be hard to build one. And so when I started the internship, they're like, okay, let's talk about your possible internship projects. And they're like, one thing, maybe you could build like some kind of key storage, right? Like kind of a classic security issue. Like, hey, we have a bunch of secrets or keys, and like maybe we can build some storage, or like, I don't know, I think maybe HashiCorp Vault was around at the time. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, that doesn't sound that interesting. And they're like, okay, well, what if you built a tool that would like look at the inputs of a Rails app and look at the outputs and like find cross-site scripting? I was like, yes, that sounds familiar. I think I would like to work on that. The funny thing is, 11 years later, that's not how Brakeman works. Like, it doesn't actually do like source to sync tracing. But yeah, that ended up being Brakeman was the internship project. At the end of the internship, it was, oh, you want to open source this? And I was like, yes, of course I want to open source this. And, open sourced it, gave a presentation at the local Ruby meetup. And yeah, it kind of went from, well, actually, it didn't really go from there. What happened was that, I went back to school and I didn't have use for a Rails security tool. So it was just kind of sitting there. And then AT&T Interactive, where I did the internship, called me and said, hey, we have a full-time position. Would you like to come back and work on the team? And I was like, well, I don't know. I'm still doing my PhD. But right around that same time, my advisor said, hey, I'm retiring and I don't have any more money. And so I was like, okay,
Oh,
well,
Jesus.
all right, I guess I'll take this job then and, go join the security team at AT&T Interactive. And so when I went back, then I was like, okay, now I'll continue working on Brakeman. And actually ended up spending a lot of my time at AT&T working on Brakeman. And yeah, just haven't really stopped since then.
Nice. And so that kind of gives me a bit of foresight into how it began. When did it start to become like the Brakeman company? So from being just a open source kind of project into actually, being more of a like commercial aspect, or actual entity where you were like fully in. Like, I'm building this. I'm going to make this like something that could be potentially as sellable in the future, or XYZ.
Yeah, kind of funny because I I think about it as being like a while before that happened, but it was only like 3, 4 years later. Um, Now, of course, I had the idea of like, hey, okay, like what if we had a service that would run Brakeman for people would upload their source code, it would run Brakeman. I actually even started building something out like that. And then I was like, you know what? No one's going to do this. Like, no one's going to upload their code to a third party, especially a third party that's then going to run a security scan and store their security vulnerabilities, in the cloud. So I was like, yeah, I don't know if anyone's going to go for this. So I kind of left alone. And then
Mm-hmm.
along came, the first one I was really aware of was Code Climate, that was like, upload your source code and we'll scan it for you. And, then they eventually added Brakeman support for the security scanning. And so I was like, oh, well, great. Like they already did this, like uh, I saw somewhere, I think it was somewhere on their website or maybe a blog post. And I was like, okay, like they've already done 90% of the work that I would have to do to build out a security scanning service. So I'm not even going to try. Um, and I don't remember what time frame this was, maybe 2012 or so, sometime in there. And then, yeah, a little while later, I was at a conference and I ran into Jim Manico. and he said, hey, if you ever want to turn Brakeman into a business, let me know. Like, I'd be interested in helping out. And I don't know if he regrets saying that. He probably doesn't.
Probably
Um,
not.
but I kind of took that as like, oh, you want to start a business with me. And I think he probably wanted to be a little bit lighter involved than what I was thinking. But yeah, I ended up following up like right after that. I was like, hey, Jim, send him an email. Hey, Jim, were you serious about this? Like, let's talk about like starting a company around Brakeman. And I think this was either I think this was early 2014 when this happened. And it took a few months. We talked about it, and then Jim said, "Hey, we should bring on Neil Matatal." He was basically like number 2 contributor to Brakeman, and we had also worked together at Twitter and we had actually briefly overlapped at AT&T Interactive as well. So it was around that time. We're like, okay, like let's try doing this for real, but we're not going to build a service. We're just going to sell Brakeman, the scanner, and do a proprietary fork. And yeah, I was at Twitter at the time, and actually Neil was also at Twitter at the time. We were working together at Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was basically the origin of like, okay, let's try to make this into a commercial product.
God, it wasn't like Twitter at the beginning was Ruby as well, right? So kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean that's basically how I ended up at Twitter. I gave a talk about Brakeman at OWASP USA, or sorry, OWASP AppSec USA, and Alex Smolin was at Twitter at the time, saw the talk, and was like, "Hey, like, why don't you come by Twitter sometime?" And then Alex and Neil knew each other, so Neil and I ended up going and working at Twitter around the same time. And yeah, it was because they were a Rails shop. They had started using Brakeman, and yeah, so I ended up going and working on Brakeman at Twitter. Definitely at the beginning, I was spending a lot of time on Brakeman, and then it kind of trailed off a bit. We built out some tooling around Brakeman, some automation and stuff, and yeah, Twitter was Rails. Of course, I saw the transition away from Ruby and Rails at Twitter, and was a little bit part of why I left.
You don't like change.
That's right.
Yeah, got it. Okay. I have an interesting one actually. So obviously you have been kind of involved with the Rails community for a long time. You said around 15 years. And what was your relationship like with like the Rails community in general? Like you started to build like what was the and it still is today I think like one of the most popular used Ruby on Rails scanners. Like how did that kind of community and development community and also just the Rails team themselves kind of interact with Brakeman? What was that kind of like?
um, to be honest, haven't had a lot of interaction with the Rails team themselves. I think I was on like 1 or 2 email threads about a security vulnerability or two, like really minimal interaction with them. But I would say the Rails community themselves, yeah, they really embrace Brakeman. I've given a number of talks at RailsConf about Brakeman and about security. Um, so yeah, I would say the community picked it up pretty quickly, really. Um, of course, I think nowadays it's even easier because people are really used to having automated tools that tell them things about their code. When Brakeman came out, I think it was a little bit more of a novelty in sort of like the open source community. Obviously, there have been commercial static analysis tools for a long time, but as far as like having linters and things just be part of your daily work and your daily workflow, has really moved from like something that some people were doing to like, yeah, this is standard. Like I open a pull request on GitHub and I get automated feedback about it. So yeah, Brakeman fit in there pretty well. Yeah, I think overall the community has been very supportive. Um, and yeah, as far as like code contributions, Brakeman is, I think it's something like 80, 90% like my code contributions. But what's to me more valuable than that is when people just come along and they're like, hey, I ran this on my app and something broke, or I got a false positive, or I got a false negative. I was expecting to see something, I didn't see it, or hey, why isn't it finding this vulnerability or that vulnerability? Those kinds of things have been very helpful. And I've really appreciated that kind of feedback.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely important to have, actual, people in the trenches kind of reporting that type of stuff. And when it's coming from the developers themselves, who obviously are running the code, obviously probably security people too reporting it as well. But, it's quite an interesting thing. So I want to be conscious of time. So I'm going to ask one question and then, well, two questions, and then or maybe three. I don't know.
As many as you want. As
Okay,
many
okay, okay. So, what was some of the hardest challenges you faced with making Brakeman? So, was it some of the commercial stuff? Was it, actually making it be, reduce false positives, like, actually finding, vulnerabilities without kind of, chunking over? Like, what was the kind of like the best, like the kind of technical or the challenges in general that you've seen by trying to build Brakeman?
Yes, avoiding false positives is the biggest job of building a static analysis security tool. Like it honestly is. Can I find this vulnerability? Easy. Like that part's easy. It's can I find this vulnerability and not also a bunch of garbage along with it? Like, how can I reduce that? That is just the ongoing problem for all static analysis security tools, all of them. Um, it's mostly like, how do I reduce false positives? There have certainly been performance challenges with Brakeman. Very early on, it was pretty slow. I mean, this was really early on, like around 1.0. It was very, very slow. And I remember I had basically a ceiling. I can't remember what it was. I think it was like it can't run more than 20 minutes, something like that. If it runs more than 20 minutes, that's, we can't go over 20 minutes. Now, for me, it's like if it takes more than 10 minutes, that's way too long. Most scans honestly are like under a minute, but for real commercial Rails applications, I tend to think of like 10 minutes as being kind of the cap. I can tell you, for example, at Gusto, it's around 3 minutes for a scan. Now, I understand for commercial tools, 3 minutes would be, pretty fast. But there's also a trade-off between performance and basically thoroughness. And Brakeman leans towards, let me be fast and maybe a little bit less thorough. This is, I think probably after false positives, performance is the next like big challenge of static analysis tools.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen the pain of like someone running a commercial static analysis tool in their pipeline, and it increases the build time by X amount because it takes so long to run the security scan after the code has been built, and that's kind of definitely a large challenge that people try and resolve. I remember like there was a few presentations from Facebook, and they can scan like with their proprietary tools, most of their code base within 12 minutes. And like, obviously that's still quite a long time, but that's the entire code base. And
yeah, which I'm sure is massive.
Yeah, and obviously there are tools that if it's developers move fast, and software development moves fast in general. And if you can't keep up with that, you're definitely going to probably like be the less alternative option, I guess, out of all of things, which I kind of see as like a really big domain space that you need to try and solve. And I think that's what most people are trying to solve these days.
I agree. I'm kind of waiting for, I guess I've been waiting on this for a while, but like, what is the next wave of static analysis, especially security tools that do keep this in mind, right? Is like, when I do a build in CI, I want to be able to run my security tool, and it needs to not be any longer than running my test suite. And so that just kind of gives you like a bound on like how long can I take to run my static analysis tool. and yeah, like I said, with Brakeman, it's always been, well, since like around 1.0 when I fixed like the super slow scanning. Um, it's been like it let's err on the side of speed, and if that means we can't go as in depth, then that's what it means. And for the most part, I think maintain that balance pretty well, in my very humble opinion.
I think you're allowed to be humble at this point. You've built a very amazing tool, which people are going to see very shortly. I think, do you know, maybe there's like a lot of like kind of room for improvement where, every time you do a build, you could like, rather than try and scan the entire suite, you could just choose like one particular kind of, you know, attack suite to scan. So like, let's say like you want to just look for XSS this time, and then next time you build, you want to look for like SQL injection. I know that may miss things in that particular thing, but in reality, like, sometimes it's either because they're trying to like, scan everything, which obviously the more rules that you put in place, the longer the scan might take, right? As well, in some regard, maybe not. Or is
Well,
it more just transpiling the actual code itself? Would you say is the
yeah,
biggest problem?
the for Brakeman, the rules themselves are very fast. Um, they used to be slow. They used to be
Yeah.
slow for sure. I mean, many, many years ago, they were slow. But now, actually, the rules are very fast. What takes a long time is reading all the files, parsing all the files, and then building up the data flow
Yeah.
uh, from those files. That's actually the part that's slow. And then running the rules is fast. So more rules is fine for the most part. Um, the part that basically, I mean, for Brakeman at least, and I don't know how far you want to go into this, but and for most tools, I'd probably all static analysis tools that do data flow analysis is the slow part. That's what takes up the time. So for Brakeman, yeah, that running fewer rules won't help, but trying to do um, for example, if it's in a pull request, only scanning the files that have changed. The problem with Brakeman, so there's tooling that will do this for you, right? Like, oh, just run your linters or whatever on the files that have changed. Unfortunately for Brakeman, it doesn't really work that way. It needs to scan your entire application to understand your application.
Yep. I think a
And so
lot a lot of tools do that actually as well, though. It's not like, yeah, it's a very common problem, I guess.
yeah, for Brakeman, it really needs that state. So the only way you can get basically these sort of differential scans with Brakeman is to keep the state in memory from a full scan, and then you can do like incremental scans after that. Um, and the only tool that does this is a tool called Guard Brakeman, which is a plugin for Guard, which will watch your files and then run things. So that's the only tool that actually will do differential scans with Brakeman, but it doesn't really work for CI. I
Yep.
did make a couple attempts at like, okay, can we dump out this state and then like be able to load it later? Unfortunately, I left that code at Synopsys, and I don't. So, and I never got it fully working. So, a bit of a bummer there, but yeah, it's still kind of in the back of my mind, like make Brakeman even faster. Um, and I think there are some companies, which I probably shouldn't name, that have done some work around like caching some of the, like caching the parsed files, for example. So Brakeman doesn't have to read and parse them again. Um, but yeah, so yeah, anyways, yes, it can
Yep.
always go faster. And yeah, that's one of the big challenges is how do you balance speed versus depth?
Yeah, I have seen a lot of tools that obviously build like a database that you can obviously continually scan, but obviously you have to rebuild that database every time you make changes to the code. So it's kind of like, very difficult because, rebuilding and trying to actually like then scan it again is obviously the rebuilding part is the largest concern. Which, yeah. So you are right in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some logic in Brakeman, again, in this sort of, I guess it's in Brakeman, it's called rescanning. Um, is like, okay, if you change this file, what are the other file, like, what does that affect? And so, like, what are the things that I need to like rescan in order to like change the state appropriately? To be very honest with you, I don't have a lot of confidence in that logic. It's not very well tested,
Okay.
but it's there. It is there. But yeah, sometimes it's like, well, if you change this, then you kind of have to rescan like a whole bunch of things. And sometimes it's like, oh, if you change that, I don't have to rescan anything because that file was like a text file or something that doesn't affect the results. So there is some logic and some intelligence there, but again, it kind of has to be online, and that makes it not very useful for most use cases. Anyways, that's an area, if someone's really interested in diving in and contributing that, happy to work with someone on that.
I mean, you can find him on President Beef on Twitter if you really want to dive into that. So
Yes.
we've been talking a lot about, obviously, Brakeman. So let's now just dive into maybe showing how do you get access to Brakeman? Where's the best place to go? The general usage, maybe a bit more some advanced stuff. However deep you want to go, that would be great.
Sure. I guess I'll just like share
Mm-hmm.
at least my browser screen real quick. Yeah, I mean, if you want to find Brakeman, it's at brakemanscanner.org. Although, honestly, I normally go to brakeman.org that redirects there because Brakeman Scanner is too long. Here's the very ancient. I'm not very good at web design. This was like a stock, like design from somewhere. Anyways, this is where you can find the release information about Brakeman and so on, documentation, including not well some time ago, kind of like a quick start guide here for installing and running it and so on, and kind of what it looks like. I'll walk through this though live, and then some tips for like steps for like remediating and getting it into automation and all of this, and some links to some tooling. Um, as far as the source code, if I click this, will it take me to the source code? No, it'll take me to commit. On GitHub, you can look for Brakeman and source code is there, and all the usual stuff that you might want to know. As well as, if you want to report any issues, you can report those. If you want to open some pull requests, that's fine. So that's all there. But I'm going to switch over to just like, if you want to just like really start using it. So I have RailsGoat here, which is an OWASP project for, intentionally vulnerable Ruby on Rails application. Check it out if you want to dig into some Rails vulnerabilities. But yeah, basically, you just like install it, via Ruby gems, gem install Brakeman like this. I guess I should show you what I'm looking at here. There's, it's just a Rails app, normal Rails app type stuff. And then if you want to run Brakeman, you just type Brakeman and you run it. It'll run the scan, and then you get out this colorful text output here, and you can kind of scroll through. You've got your basics of, what did it do? This is what I was kind of mentioning. Like, most scans are really fast, so like this was like less than a second to do the actual scan.
That's pretty impressive.
It is until you realize like RailsGoat's tiny, like
Oh, I got you.
But yeah, this. So I run Brakeman across when I'm doing development. I run it across about 450 open source Rails apps. Majority of those take like less than a minute to scan, and then there's a couple outliers that maybe take a few minutes to scan. But yeah, in general, it's pretty fast. As we were discussing, I think that's an important feature of a static analysis tool, is at least have the option of being fast. So yeah, you get your overview, some information about your app. As you can see, like, pretty small app. An overview of what warning types were found. Is this big enough, or should I make it a little bit bigger? Okay, like a couple steps bigger. And then you get into your warnings. So you have okay, this is a high confidence warning, cross-site scripting. You have an unescaped cookie value, and then it shows you what was the cookie value and where is it, what line number, just your typical stuff. This actually, probably not a lot of people know this. You can customize this output. I'm not going to try to do it live because I don't remember the commands exactly, but you can
Yeah,
actually
fine.
customize like what fields you want in this text output. If you want a little bit more information, you can. Another thing I'll point out, it might be hard to see because I like to change my colors, but for example, in this warning here where we have user controlled method execution, so there's this purple text here. That means like that's the text, like that's the code that Brakeman is trying to warn you about. Hey, you're passing a query parameter into this try method, which will actually execute the method named whatever is passed in. So very obvious remote code execution kind of issue here. So Brakeman's trying to tell you like, hey, it's this query parameter that I'm concerned about. That's why I'm warning, and so on and so on. So you'll see all this. And so this is useful for sort of like a first pass on your application. You see we have some medium confidence warnings, and there's no low confidence, but there's also a low confidence warning. Um, Something to know, and since you work at a company that has a static analysis tool, you're probably somewhat familiar with this. So Brakeman just conflates severity and confidence. I didn't know at the time that most tools have like a confidence level and a severity level. Later on, someone gifted me Brian Chess's book on what is it called? The static analysis, security static analysis, or something like that. It's like a classic book.
It's one of the early adopters, right, for the space.
Yeah, yeah, and so I read that book after I built Brakeman. I was like, oh, you're supposed to have two different things, like two different axes for severity and confidence. But anyways, I conflated them, and that's just what we live with now. Although I will say in Brakeman Pro that we mentioned earlier, in the UI we switched it to severity instead of confidence. Yeah. But let me continue on with this. So for automation, you're probably going to want the JSON report. The JSON report will give you the most information. Like all the information Brakeman has will be in the JSON report. So same kind of things, like here's the information about the scan, and then like here and some information about the apps and what was the Ruby version, the Brakeman version, and then your list of warnings. You can see like there's more information here than there was in the like text output, including like a fingerprint you can use for deduplication or whatever, or tracking, a link to more information about the warning type. This is null, but where, what was the method, the class, or sorry, this is the location type, but the class and the method where it found it, etc. I don't know if there's one that actually has like, no, no, no.
Yeah, the one thing I love about JSON output, especially when you have like so much verbose information, is obviously you can pick and choose what you want. And for this would obviously be so nice because you could basically extend this however you want. Obviously, I'm sure there's already a lot of integrations that may exist in the world that people have done. But you could say like, you could obviously integrate this to any kind of like, monitoring tool that you're using, and just have this information like, hey, here's the line where the issue is, this particular in this particular file, and this is the link to the warning types. Do the warning types have like remediation type stuff, or is it purely like we're just going to tell you what the problem is, and obviously you as an organization know the types of things that you need to fix?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix, honestly. Anyone wants to contribute to Brakeman documentation, you can, around these warning types. Some have more or less. It's pretty basic, to be honest. I did want to point out this one does have a render path information. This is basically like, hey, this was the controller where this template was rendered from. This was this is a layout. So, this was the template that ended up getting rendered, and that's where we're getting our cross-site scripting. This can be pretty useful for like just understanding where a vulnerability is coming from. And this is what kind of mentioned with like the data flow analysis. This is the kind of what tends to set Brakeman apart from other security tools is being able to do this data flow analysis from your controllers to your templates, which again, going, to kind of tie things back together here, right? The first thing that Brakeman was built to find was cross-site scripting. So the most important thing was, all right, where's the input coming from? All right, it's coming from controllers. Where does it go out? It goes out in the templates that get rendered. So that was like the first thing that Brakeman was built around, was finding cross-site scripting like this.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
get some information there.
this is obviously interesting. So I actually wrote one of my undergraduate projects in Ruby, and I think it was because Ryan Dewhurst was writing, I believe, WP Scan in Ruby at the time. And I was like, seems like a cool language. And obviously I wanted to maybe contribute to that one day. And so I just started writing things in Ruby. And like, this is nice. So like, you have basically a file, so you have an admin controller, but then you have this embedded Ruby, which basically allows you to do lots of like interpolation. And like, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time since I wrote Ruby, Ruby code at all. But if I remember correctly, ERB is like embedded Ruby, right? Where you can basically have a lot of interpolation, and that's obviously where a lot of the potential like cross-site scripting type vulnerabilities are going to happen, because you'll use these specifically in things like layouts and rendering of pages and so on.
That's exactly correct. Yep.
Yes, gold star for me.
Yeah. And just to kind of finish this out, yeah, there's like, if you ignore any warnings, if there are any errors, and then also letting you know if you ignored a warning, that warning is now gone. It tells you about that. So yeah, the JSON report is what you want to use for any kind of integrations, any kind of tooling. It's very stable. It basically never changes, and if it does, it's pretty much additions, not anything else.
Could you show? I know this obviously is a bit off topic, but could you show like maybe some of the commands, like if you already wanted to run like cross-site scripting, for example, or if you wanted to like ignore particular files, etc. I'm pretty sure that would be very useful to some of the viewers who are still quite like new to the scanner.
Yeah. So if you just want to run one check, of course, I only remember the short options. The short options
are fine.
is -t. I guess for test, or you can check the Brakeman, help, and it will tell us. There are quite a few options here. One is going to be something about what tests to run. Yes, so --test. Oh, I guess I could have guessed that. Yeah. So, and the other thing you can do here, if you're, of course, for me, like I just like know all this stuff, right? But if you want to list the checks that are in Brakeman, they call them it's called checks instead of rules, but the rules, what's the long, hold on, what's the long, checks. You'll get a list of all the checks that are available and a little description, including, does it show it doesn't show which ones are optional, but anyways, you can take this name, or I guess for cross-site scripting, it's like, what is the cross-site scripting check called? It's called check cross-site scripting. Oops, sorry about that. Which is pretty obvious. Not all of them are that obvious. So you can run something like, clear, Brakeman --test, check cross-site scripting, or actually you don't even have to put that. You can just do cross-site scripting like this, and then it will only run the cross-site scripting check. As you can see, checks run just cross-site scripting, and we only get the cross-site scripting vulnerability. You can also just exclude tests, which you do. Let me check the help again. You do by using except. So if you want to
I see.
not run cross-site scripting, but you want to run everything else, you can do except, and you can give it a list. It doesn't have to be just one. And then you'll get everything except you did get cross-site scripting, but I'll bet you anything that
it just doesn't show it in the output.
No, it will. Okay,
I
so
see.
this might be interesting. So the rule that was run was actually this rule, JSON entity escape. Not so it's by like which rule, not by category.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so there's that. But let me also show you the other thing you asked about, which is like, what if I want to ignore some warnings? And this is like, I don't have any like, oh, Brakeman has no false positives. That's not true. Of course it has false positives. Of course, there are going to be things you want to ignore. So you can use this interactive mode, which is kind of modeled on like git add dash p or whatever. So it's like, okay, so it'll ask you, okay, what's the file, which I don't think one exists. You want to, yes, I want to continue with an empty one. Then it kind of gives, okay, you want to look at all the warnings. Yes, we want to look at all the warnings. And then it'll just kind of walk you through like, I know this is at the bottom of my screen, so hopefully you can see it. Like, okay, here's a warning. What do you want to do about it? You want to ignore it. You want to ignore it and add a notation for why you're ignoring it, which, yes, you should do that. You want to, skip it and then like move on to the next one. Do you want to unignore this? You want to ignore this and all the other warnings? Yeah, so there's like, you can basically step through this. For example, we want to like, okay, like, yeah, ignore that one. Great. Then it moves on to the next one. So I'm going to do A, which is like, ignore this and all the other warnings. So we'll ignore all the warnings. You can see it's going to say, okay, ignoring 17 warnings, save changes, start over, quit, then don't save. So I'm going to save. It's going to say, where do you want to save it? This is the default. So we'll save it there. So now you see it actually says no warnings found, but ignored warnings 17. So if we run Brakeman again, it'll say, okay, no warnings because we ignored all the warnings. And if you're curious, the ignore file that it generates looks like this. It's just the list of warnings. And actually, all that matters in this file is the fingerprint of each warning. Brakeman actually doesn't use the rest of this. This is for your benefit. And you'll have your notes in here as well. So this is actually how I recommend starting off with Brakeman. Run it. If there's egregious things that need to be fixed, go file some tickets or go fix them. Anything else, ignore them, right? Like you build out this file. So when you run Brakeman, you get, again, I don't know why I'm running again, but you get no warnings. Great. Now you put it in CI and you run it. And if there's a new warning, okay, I'll run this again. I'll unignore a warning. This is the easiest way to unignore. I'll unignore a warning, skip the rest of the warnings, save. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so now you see we have one warning. Okay, so we're pretending we ignored all the warnings. We run Brakeman again, let's say in CI, part of a pull request, we get a warning. If we check the error or the exit code here, the exit code is 3. 3 means Brakeman found a warning. So at this point, you should fail your build, and then developer can go in and say like, okay, I'm looking at this. Well, this is not an interesting one because it's a CVE, but maybe they're like, oh, we patched it, or for some reason we're not vulnerable to this. I'm going to ignore it. So they can ignore it, build passes, they commit their change, to the, Brakeman. Oh, actually, I guess they can, no, it's not part of our Git, but, here's Brakeman. There would be a change to the ignore file. They can commit that and then move on, right? This is how we use it at Gusto. This is how a lot of companies use Brakeman. You put it in CI, you run it as a CI step, you fail on any new warnings. Something you might also want to do, though, is maybe you only care about medium and high warnings. This is very common.
That was going to be my next question. I noticed that there was a severity value somewhere where you could choose confidence level. Sorry, confidence as it's used in inside. Yeah.
So you can set the minimum confidence level. This is honestly, this has got to change in some future release because you set it as an integer value, which is silly. Like, what do those mean? And honestly, I also forget. But for medium, if you only want medium and high, you can do confidence. Well, this isn't going to do anything because we only had mediums and highs. But let's see if I only wanted highs. I don't know if this is right. It might be 3 or it might be 1. Oh, actually, this is good. So, we're ignoring all the warnings. So yeah, there's that.
But there are 11 warnings now rather than 17. So you definitely have changed the severity report.
Yes, and you see there's these obsolete ignore entries. So we had entry warnings we are ignoring that are no longer in the report. So it's kind of telling you like, hey, if you want to go clean up that ignore file, you can do so. If you go back to the interactive mode, there's an option to like prune out those findings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of options here for like controlling your scans and setting different things. Most of the time, when you start off, you can just run Brakeman. You don't have to supply any options. That was actually something when I was building Brakeman and I was looking at other security tools. Something that kind of drove me nuts was like I'd have to like figure out how to use the tool before I could use it.
Yep.
And with Brakeman, I'm like, okay, I don't want you to have to set any options to run Brakeman. If you are in the root of your Rails app, which we are, you just run Brakeman and you get a report, which I guess I've shown multiple times now.
Which I still think is great. Mike, I have a question for you. Actually, I know it's a bit maybe I maybe would ruin your train of thought with this, but like I saw like the obsolete stuff from the previous one, or like the one with the fingerprints.
Yes.
Do people tend to like use that for also tracking? Because once you like change your severity, there might be some things that might be classed as a low that might be very critical to fix as well. So would you map this into like you take that value that you then read your Brakeman ignore file, find the fingerprint, and then report the type of thing? Is this common? Do you see this happening at all inside organizations, or how is this generally used?
I have not heard of anyone doing that. Certainly for me, yeah, it's like, okay, this is basically my index into that ignore file. Mm-hmm. I can tell you what we did at Gusto, and we've done this a couple of times, like when a new version of Brakeman comes out and it finds new things, is basically just put like the Jira ticket in as a note in the ignore file. I guess I didn't really demonstrate that, but like if we were going to go back and do all this again, I'll just do this. So you can like write a little note and be like, security, like whatever, like you do, right? And then save that. And now when you look back at that file, which I guess I can open it back up again. And I guess I look for, okay, I can be like, oh, there's a ticket open to deal with this. And I can go look at that ticket. I don't know how much people index on the fingerprints, honestly. I haven't really heard people using it outside of like just normal integrations. But maybe they do. I don't know. I actually don't know on that.
Awesome. And I have obviously one more question, which I think maybe someone or a few people who will be watching this either today or on the VOD might be interested in. How do you go about writing custom integrations, like custom, like either rules or custom, is there any kind of like resources you might recommend around those domains? I know we can't fit this in today's session because
No.
I think it would probably take like a 2-hour session just to kind of give the overview, right? For most of, XYZ. But like, could you just show us where those resources might live?
Yes. Yeah. Let me switch back to the site. So writing custom rules has been a little bit of a weak point for Brakeman. It's not as easy as it should be. And it's also a little bit like, there's also the question of like, once I write the rule, where do I put it? Yep. So I did try to put together, so this is on the GitHub page for Brakeman. On the wiki pages, there is creating custom Brakeman rules. And so it walks you through a little bit of like, what does it look like to write a check or a rule? So each rule is a Ruby class. So you have to write Ruby code to write your rule. And then these get loaded in and executed as part of Brakeman. I don't believe this is ideal. For Brakeman Pro, I actually did implement like a JSON-based custom rule format. I don't know if anyone ever used it, and unfortunately, again, it's at Synopsys now. But I don't know that I really even liked it that much. But this will walk you through a little bit of like, this is your basic skeleton. And here it is with some annotations about like what this all means. And then really rules in Brakeman are basically built around finding method calls in your code. One of the things that makes this make sense in Ruby is that almost everything in Ruby is a method call. So even things you might not expect to be method calls are actually method calls. And this is also why Brakeman's rules are very fast. Is again, almost all of them are built around like find a call, check its arguments. That's pretty much the rules in Brakeman.
Yep.
So this walks you through like how to do that. Target method. Oh no, this is the result. So you'll get back something like this, and then you can put your logic around it. It's not as easy as it should be, but this is the resource. This will walk you through it. Writing, the warning output, like how do you generate the warning, and all of that. And then what you do, I don't know even. Oh yeah, it's on this page. Great, I documented it.
Yay.
Then how do you load it? You use this add checks path, and Brakeman will load all of the rules that are in that path. So, and also, yes, note that loading checks means running arbitrary Ruby code. So be aware of that. So
not as bad as running Perl code, but yeah, still as bad.
It's still bad. Yeah, just be aware. Don't run arbitrary Ruby code if you can help it. So then it's like, where do you put this? And right now, the only real good answer is like you would have it as like alongside your source code. I don't love that answer because it's like, well, what if I have many applications and I want to share the rules across them? I don't know what to do about that, honestly. Well, you could what you could do is package those rules up as a gem and then give Brakeman the path to that gem when you install it, so it'd be like your bundle or whatever. It's not great. I don't love it. People have suggestions or want to contribute that back. Please do. So yeah, this is where you would go though to get started on writing your own rules.
Awesome. And what about like obviously like the integration? I saw like those references to integration into things like I guess you have add-ons and stuff for maybe some of the CI/CD stuff, or how does that kind of generally work?
I guess I have a couple different pages here. There's companies that will just run Brakeman for you. Tools using Brakeman, is this the same? These are a little bit out of date. If you're using Jenkins, this is probably wrong. Okay, I gotta update this page.
That's right. These things will get outdated.
Hold on. If I click this, it will take me to this page, and it's gone. So I'll update that. Anyways, there's a Jenkins plugin that will run Brakeman. Sorry, it won't run Brakeman for you, but you can run Brakeman in Jenkins. It will consume the results. There's some other ones here if you want to run it in a GitHub action, etc. And this is probably a little bit out of date. But yeah, as far as doing integrations, just use the JSON report and go from there. Or somewhat newly, you can use the SARF report, SARIF. That is like what you want to say it?
No, you're the static analysis expert here, but I'm very happy that people are starting to adopt this.
Yeah, so GitHub is using this for their tooling integration, and other companies are starting to pick up SARF as the common format for static analysis security tools for their output and for doing integrations. So Brakeman, I don't know if this is very interesting, but Brakeman, thanks actually to some folks at GitHub, oh no, that's not how you do it. Brakeman-F, SARF, you will get a SARF report out, which is a JSON-based format. We don't have any warnings though, because we ignored all of them. So that's not very interesting, but let's see if we get rid of our ignore file here, then we will get a different, so you get your findings in here. So that's another option. I don't love this because of like things like this, like depending on what if you're building a general tool, okay, you can start consuming SARF. If you are just doing Brakeman, just use the JSON, the normal JSON report. That's probably better. Also, someone added, I'll probably get this wrong. I wonder if it's in here. Format types. No, this is under output. Oh, hold on. I think it's, no. I won't tell you what the options are. I apologize for this. Anyway, there's a GitHub Actions out format as well, which will, like, if you run Brakeman in a GitHub action, GitHub will like pull out, you can do like file annotations from it. So someone added that. It's not out yet. It'll be in the next release. So there's like a lot of ways of using it. In a lot of ways, if you want to integrate Brakeman. Brakeman is built for integrations. You want to consume Brakeman output, please do. If you, otherwise, there's something I normally show and I forgot to show, or I didn't get there. You can do an HTML report.
The one thing I noticed that was really cool is that you can provide your own CSS, so you could add your own flavor to it for your company and stuff, which it looked like. I'm assuming it's for this. Yeah.
You can.
Which obviously we don't need to do today, but I just thought it would be cool to bring up.
Yeah, you can do it. I don't know if anyone's ever done it. This is the Brakeman HTML report. People have told me it's super ugly. And I'm like, yeah, this hasn't changed in like 10 years. So, it's here. It'll give you links out to things. The sort of hidden feature here is you can click on a warning and it will show you like a little code snippet where it came from.
Nice.
But yeah, this is the HTML report. Honestly, I don't think anyone is really using this that seriously anymore, because it's more about like, let me dump it into another tool and use that tool. But it's here. You can even like, this is another little hidden feature. You can like click on the columns and sort them.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's clickable. It just looks like it's a static.
Yeah, there's some reasons behind that. But yeah, this is like a self-contained HTML file. You can use it if you want. If you want to make it more beautiful, contributions welcome. But yeah, so there is also this.
So if you are looking to contribute to Brakeman, there's definitely some like UI changes that would be appreciated, and also
Absolutely.
some additional. And obviously they look like they could do some maybe Wikipedia. Or sorry, not Wikipedia, but like the wiki could definitely use a little spruce if anyone knows those things which can be updated. We definitely would appreciate it. And I think it was also the if you wanted to kind of like, well, I would assume that would be good for Brakeman. Like, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like taking or making references to the OWASP cheat sheet, security cheat sheet for like particular findings, etc. That could also probably be a pretty decent contribution, because it sounded like that could be something that could offer some value in the sense of remediation. Because obviously you don't want to write these things from scratch. Using something that's already been vetted could be a really good contribution.
Yes, the Brakeman documentation certainly references some OWASP resources, but yeah, if you're like, hey, I really want to write up some information about vulnerabilities and how to fix them, especially in Rails, contributing to the Brakeman documentation. Oh, I guess since we're doing all this screen sharing, I can just show you. Wait, what are you seeing right now? Is it the Brakeman report you're seeing?
No, we're seeing your browser, the incognito browser.
Okay. Yeah, so there's Brakeman site is the Git. So there's a GitHub repo in here, docs, warning types, and then here's all the files. You could pick one, and it's just markdown. So, well, basically markdown, and oh, this one moved. So that's, I guess, not very interesting. If I click on this, will that work? No. Okay. I picked a bad one, but the point is, it's just Markdown. You can contribute to this site, and if you're curious, also the license on this, it's under Creative Commons license. So contributions welcome to this site. It's open source, and you can contribute. Documentation is great.
Yeah, I think that's probably all, like, especially when you're getting like, oh, let's go back to the talk screen. Yeah, perfect time to end. I think that's, especially if you're getting used or like learning like a new tool, kind of contributing to the improvements to the overall kind of wiki and the site itself is generally a good starting place. I've done this for many things. I start like using the tool and I'm like, actually this hasn't been updated in 2 years. Like this flag is no longer that flag, you know? And that's definitely a good way to start getting a bit of rapport, you know, getting your name on even on the contributions list, even if it isn't a huge start, but it's like a beginning thing, right? And then you can then start to see how you could integrate custom rules or add new features. And obviously there's quite a few issues on the list, which I'm sure that means there's active contributions wanted. So, yeah,
totally agree with that. In fact, there was a recent contribution that was just, and I apologize because I don't remember exactly off the top of my head what the change was, but in that interactive ignore like menu that we were going through, someone was like, hey, actually this sentence is a little bit unclear. Like, here's a recommendation for just a copy change to like what that menu looks like. And I'm like, oh, great. Yeah, that does look better. Right. And yeah, so it's totally welcome. And absolutely, as mentioned, I've been working on Brakeman for 11 years. And clearly at this point, there's things I just don't even see, don't even think about, right? When it comes to using it, documentation, all those kinds of things, coming at it with fresh eyes and being like, hey, this could be a little bit better. Always appreciated.
Awesome. Well, thank you for today, Justin. It's been a fantastic experience for me. I haven't used Brakeman in a very long time since I no longer really touch Ruby these days, but it has been a fantastic experience. Thank you for today.
Thank you for having me, Lewis. I really appreciate it, and I enjoy it.
All right. So this was the 10th episode of SecuriTEA and Crumpets. Please follow Justin on Twitter, which is twitter.com/President Beef. I asked him last time why President Beef, and he said, I don't know. So I'm not going to...
I don't tell anyone.
He doesn't tell anyone. So maybe
better not to know.
Just add him on Twitter and ask him why, and he'll be like, not telling you. Obviously, make sure you check out brakeman.org, which will take you to the main website. And obviously check out the GitHub, which I've already linked in the stream. It'll also be in the references. And we'll see you next time.